What was your "we need to leave now" moment? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. I was traveling alone in Bangkok, taking a tuk-tuk, open-air taxi somewhere. A common scam I'd been warned of was for drivers to make a stop somewhere and basically lock you in a shop until you bribe your way out. My driver started asking if I was doing any shopping and suggested we stop at his cousin's store. No thanks. He starts begging, please, you'll really like his store. More emphatically, no thanks. Take me to my destination. He says we're just going to stop there quickly on the way. So I just waited until he stopped at a red light, then got out and walked away. He was screaming at me to come back, but he can't exactly leave his tuk-tuk in busy traffic. Nah, sister, don't play those games. Answer, I had something similar happen to me in Mexico. We tried to politely de-escalate the situation a couple of times before we realized it was about to get serious. So we needed to be firm and take our opportunity to physically leave the space. They all began trying to guilt us about, I guess this is how you treat people in your country. In this country, we treat people with respect. We just laughed and walked away as they continued to scream. Story 2 was in a train in Berlin. Some dude was crawling through on all fours, barking and growling at people, which isn't really the weirdest thing for Berlin, but that dude's eyes screamed substances-induced psychosis, and I was like, nope, I'll wait for the next train. A couple minutes later, I see police running in because the dude bit a random woman that was sitting there. Story 3. My cat was lying on my shoulder like normal. Out of nowhere, he bit me and ran to the bedroom door. I was confused and a little upset. Opened the door, smelled smoke. Microwave was on fire. Answer. When a friend of mine was a kid, her family dog started barking in the middle of the night. Her dad yelled at the dog from upstairs and went back to bed. The dog was relentless, and finally her dad went downstairs. The dog was behind a baby gate, and that's when he smelled smoke. An electrical fire had started in the basement, and unbeknownst to her dad, in the moment, had already spread through the walls to the main floor. Her dad got everyone out, but the dog didn't make it. Apparently, the house was fully engulfed within minutes of them getting out. Story 4. Several years ago, we had a bit of a flood during spring after a period of intense rain and rapid snowmelt. Me and my dad were on one of our favorite nature trails when we observed a river that had formed alongside the path and carved out a ravine. Across the ravine, I could see a large tree had fallen after the ground beneath its roots had been washed away. There was another large tree along the bank that looked very vulnerable as its roots were already becoming exposed. I commented that it would likely fall before the day was over. We stood there for a few seconds longer, and I was fixated on the tree swaying from side to side. Then the tree suddenly went still, and I had this absolute primal fear take over and started screaming to run. As we fled, I could hear it come crashing down. It struck exactly where we had been standing. Later, I learned that large objects falling towards you don't often appear to be moving. I'm certain that the tree must have already been falling, and I had some sort of subconscious awareness of it. Answer. A tree rooted to the ground experiences changing accelerations in many directions as its root trunk system is experiencing tension and compression. We call this swaying. Once that tension breaks, it will almost exclusively experience the force of gravity, which is a constant acceleration in the direction towards the ground. When that motion is toward you, the object can look still and unchanging. I bet your subconscious did pick up on the change. Story 5. I was alone and driving to work in my Dodge Omni. Suddenly started feeling sleepy and dizzy and a tad bit sick. I realized just in time after almost nodding off twice that I was huffing exhaust fumes because my exhaust pipe broke directly under where I was sitting. I immediately had to pull over and get out and call my parents to take me the rest of the way to work while they towed my car. I still think about how many ways that could have ended very, very badly. Story 6. I was at a party and had too much to drink. The owner of the house let me sleep in the den while everyone else continued to party. There were a few times he opened the door to check on me. It felt like he wanted to see if I was asleep. It made me feel uneasy, so I left discreetly and drove home tipsy. He ended up raping a female friend of his later that year. She got tipsy and passed out at one of his parties. Answer. You just caused me to remember something that I blocked out over 20 years ago. I was hanging out with an acquaintance who was sort of bad news. We were 21 at the time, I'm 44 now, and she had invited these 3 guys over to party with us. I had already taken ecstasy with her, and I could overhear her talking with the guys in little snippets like, "Are you sure that she's cool with it?" And I got a really bad feeling. I overheard her say stuff about how she will be trading intimacy favors for coke. So I got in my car and I started driving. I got several streets away, And then I just parked in my car in the suburbs for about 4 hours until I sobered up enough to drive home. Story 7. Not me, but my mother. I was 18 months and she was heavily pregnant with my sister at the time. Our washing machine had been playing up, and Mom was holding me as she went to see how the laundry was going. She opened the door and the floor was covered in water, not enough to flood into the hall, but had formed a big puddle. My mom, with me in her arms and heavily pregnant, said she went to step through the water and see what was going on, but something in her mind told her to stop. She closed the door and called the plumber. The plumber arrived and called an electrician who immediately turned off all power. The wiring had shorted and there was a live wire sitting in the water puddle. Had my mother stepped in it, in bare feet too, this was Australia, she would have been stepping in enough voltage to eliminate her, and I guess me, as I was in her arms. There was nothing odd about the water, other than it being all over the laundry floor. But I'm glad my mother followed her instincts and didn't step in it. Answer. She very likely heard something she didn't register. Live wires in water can often have this very quiet, low hum. Probably not something she'd have consciously heard and gone, that's a weird noise, but something her brain picked up on and could only say, danger, get away. I wouldn't be surprised if those instincts are heightened on pregnant women and new mothers. Story 8. When I was a kid, I saw a guy pushing his broken-down car, so I gave him a hand to push it. He then proceeded to smash the grill open with a screwdriver to get the bonnet open, and that is when I realized I was helping a car thief. Got out of there real quick. Story 9. In 2002, I was at the Laughlin River Run, sitting at a slot machine in Harrah's. I saw a couple of Hell's Angels walk in and told my friend, "Cash out, angels are here." He has this WTF look on his face when I pushed the button on his machine and grabbed him and said we got to go. We walked right past a couple of them heading out the door, and we were partway down the hill towards the riverside before the shooting started. Story 10. My husband and I were at a 24-hour art festival that we attended every year. Around 10:45 p.m., we noticed a bunch of people arriving and changing the vibe. We both decided to get out of there immediately. A few hours later, there was a mass shooting, 18 people injured, the shooter eliminated. Story 11. About 2 months ago, it stayed up past my usual bedtime, and as soon as I got in bed, I smelled something odd and was hearing some inconsistent banging and clattering from downstairs. I don't live in a great neighborhood, so none of this was unusual, but I got out of bed to check anyway and saw flames licking up the side of the building. Yelled at my wife to get out of bed and threw on some clothes, and we hightailed it out. Our building has a shared wall with the next, and that one had an apartment on the ground floor, fully engulfed by the time we made it outside. Ended up condemning the whole building. I was the first one to call 911. Have been jerking myself awake in the night pretty consistently since then. Story 12. Walked into a dive bar in Western PA to see a woman in a white dress with a blue flower in her hair and made a comment she must have just gotten married to my group. No one believed me. Got up from our table to use the bathroom, and when I came back, she was all over a couple guys in our group who confirmed she was celebrating her elopement. I immediately know this is going to end badly, so I make multiple comments asking where her groom is. She eventually moves on to other groups keeping up the same shenanigans. Groom eventually comes into bar, sees her doing this to multiple parties. He sits down and starts punching himself in the head. Immediately, I tell my group, we need to get out of here. Someone's going to get shot. Right as I say that, the bouncer grabs the groom and throws him out. Bride and her party follows. Tell everyone to hold off until they are out of the parking lot. Not 3 minutes later, a crowd rushes in screaming, someone got shot. The bride shot and eliminated her own niece, the only family member that witnessed her wedding. Always trust your gut. Story 13. When my daughter was in 3rd grade, she came home talking about a new friend she had at school called Sally. It was Sally this and Sally that for weeks. Towards the end of term, she came home and said that Sally was having an end-of-year performance at her church, and she asked if we wanted to go to watch it. We thought, why not? We went to the church to watch it, and almost as soon as we walked in the door, we regretted it. It was in a warehouse number 1, plus someone was clearly assigned to recruit us. We had a woman named Morgan who stuck to us for the whole time we were there, and kept speaking about the church and the church beliefs, which they believed that God was a woman who they referred to as Mother. We were shown introduction videos for the church and finally were shuffled into a room for a family photo. At this point, my husband and I were clutching our kids and basically ran to nearest door into our car to exit. Answer: this is giving me flashbacks. When I was a freshman in college, I was approached numerous times by various women talking about God being the mother, etc., etc. I could not walk to the mall down the street without being asked to go somewhere for a book club or some other event. Luckily, Having grown up in a small town with culty churches and previously made the mistake of going to one of their game nights, which was 15 minutes of games and an hour and a half of scream crying and praying over people with all the lights off and candles lit in the middle of the room, I knew what was going on. Your comment just brought that memory of all that back. Still gives me the creeps. Story 14. Husband, then boyfriend, and I were living in Oakland at the time and were catching a Sunday evening BART train from the Fruitvale station into the city for a concert. While we were waiting on the platform, noticed two shady-looking dudes scoping us out. One appeared to be signaling to a third guy standing alone a long way down the platform. When the train pulled up, we stepped onto the car directly in front of us and sat down in the front row, immediately beside the two ADA seats that face the doors open area in the center of the car. Shady dude and his buddy get onto the same car shortly after us, even though they've been standing closer to another car. Shady dude sits down in the ADA seat directly beside me, his knees nearly touching mine, on a near empty train. His buddy sits down in the second row of seats, immediately behind my husband. Already the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up and my cortisol levels are spiking. But I try to talk myself down internally and tell myself I'm just being paranoid. Moments later, the third guy I suspected, shady dude, had been signaling to, who'd been standing way down the platform, stepped onto the same car but remained standing and started looking up and down the car in both directions like he was assessing the other passengers. In a split second of panic, I placed my hand firmly on my husband's knee, turned to him and looked him square in the eye and said quietly but firmly, "We need to get off this train, now." Bless his heart, to this day he didn't hesitate or question me for even a second. We stood immediately and walked briskly through the train car's doors only a second or two before they shut behind us. So close. If there were any doubts remaining in my mind, they were immediately erased when the shady dude instantly sprung out of his seat and came charging toward the closed doors as the train began to pull away, making eye contact with me the whole time, and then proceeded to walk down the center aisle of the train car as it pulled away, keeping pace with us and continuing to lock eyes with me for the next few, eternally long seconds until the train accelerated down the platform. The train goes into a dark tunnel immediately after leaving the Fruitvale station, which was also a total dead signal zone. I knew in my gut that shady dude's hands would have been on me and his buddy would have had a knife to my husband's throat the moment we entered that tunnel. Only God knows how that would have ended. Shook me to my fudge core. I can still feel the adrenaline surge in my veins just thinking about it over 10 years later. And I'll always be grateful I married the guy who didn't even blink when my gut instincts took over. Answer. My partner was in a BART car on his way to meet me in SF when a passenger behind him was shot and eliminated at West Oakland Station. Scariest text of my fudge life. I grew up in Oakland, Coliseum was my BART stop, and commuted to Civic Center for years starting as a young teenager. I've had some close calls myself, but nowhere near as close as that. Story 15. My friend and I were about 16 OF. We went to a party and she got super tipsy and passed out in a bed. I went and lay down next to her. Then her guy friend came in and told me it's all good and I could leave. I dragged her out of there by her arms and called our parents to come get us. Answer. Darn good friend. Similar thing happened to me with a super tipsy friend at a hotel pool party we were at. I was in the bathroom with my super tipsy friend trying to get her to sober up, and this other friend of mine at the time, another woman, came in, tried to get me to leave so she could take care of my super tipsy friend. She kept trying to make out with my tipsy friend, yet she wasn't tipsy herself and was getting very insistent, pushy, that she wanted more from my friend despite her vulnerable state. She'd tell me, okay, you can leave, he'll take care of her. And I was firm back, told her, get off her. She's my friend. You literally met her today like UTF predator friend, eventually got deterred and left while I helped tipsy friend up and out the door, got her home safe in an Uber. Needless to say, shortly thereafter, predator friend's actions on this day and other toxic, inappropriate actions made me burn that bridge and go NC with her. Story 16. No we, only me. I was young and dumb. I lived in rural Maine for a few years, and I liked hiking alone out into its wilderness, particularly to a little stream that I liked sitting beside while I doodled in my journal. I never told anyone I was going, never carried weaponry with me. Generally unwise choices. Anywho, I was out there one day and suddenly felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I felt a kind of terror I'd never experienced before in my life, nor since. I'm unsure how to describe it. It felt like my mind was receding into a mindless panic, and I had this terrible urge to run. I kept trying to calm myself down. I looked around. saw nothing, told myself it was my imagination and I was fine. But then I realized the forest had gone completely and utterly silent. The birds and squirrels had hushed. The frogs didn't make a sound. Even the insects seemed to have stopped. It was such an eerie, deafening silence, aside from the stream burbling beside me. But I knew at that moment, no, it wasn't in my head. If all the animals went silent, there was something dangerous nearby. So I got up, and it was so hard not to break out in a run. My body felt like it was going to bolt at any moment, and like I was just barely hanging on to self-control. I turned around and walked backward down the trail. It was a 2 or 3 minutes, felt like forever, and I was a decent ways down the trail when I finally saw it. There was a cougar crouched in the underbrush, and it was following me. It was doing that thing cats do when they're honed right on you, and they don't blink and slowly creep along. I started talking at it while I continued to reverse walk up the trail through the forest. Obviously, I survived, but that was a wake-up call for me, and I never went into the forest alone after that. In hindsight, I realized it was likely a juvenile that hadn't been away from its mom long and hadn't yet mastered the art of full concealment, or that humans aren't supposed to be targets. It was such a beautiful animal, too. But God, I'd never felt such a primal, instinctive terror like that before. I'm glad I left, and I'm glad I didn't succumb to that overwhelming urge to run. Edit. Oh my God, people. This is not AI. It takes 5 seconds to look at my profile and see this is my writing style going back years. It's called the M-rule, and we learned it in school. It's not my problem fault if you weren't attentive in English class. Stop squealing AI in my comments and sending lunatic DMs. Answer. I once got separated from my group while camping in South Africa. It was about 2 a.m. and we were walking back to main camp. All of a sudden, I hear hyenas next to me. BTW. The hyenas that make the laughing sounds hunt in packs. And when I shone my light around, I saw at least 2 pairs of eyes. I have never in my life ran so fast. Thankfully, I caught up with the group pretty fast. The hyenas probably thought I was a weak straggler and easy prey. I will never forget that sound or those eyes. What scares me the most is, had they not laughed, I would not have noticed. They must have either been confident or just doing it for fun. Story 17. 2009-ish. When I was 19 and in college, someone messaged me on Facebook saying they found my ID. He told me his address and said I could come pick it up. When I got there, his front door was slightly open and the TV was the only light on. I said, "Hello, I'm here to pick up my ID." No one responded. I started to push the door open. BC, I was young and dumb, but then realized this was a super sketch situation and booked it out of there. When I got home, I messaged him saying I came by to get my ID and told him the story, but he never responded. Thankfully, my address on my ID was still my parents' house in another city. Story 18. Last year, I called Lyft to pick me up from a bar. The car shows up and it matches the car on the app. I said the driver's name and he said it was him. Before I got in, I went around the back to check the license plate. It did not match the app. I told the driver his plates didn't match and he told me to get in anyways. I said absolutely not, and he sped off incredibly fast. Answer, always wait for the driver to ask you your name. I have a 4-digit code set up on my Uber account for verification. A driver asked me the code and I said, "No, you tell me the code and I will confirm it's correct." I'm female, so I take every precaution. I don't catch Uber often alone. I'm usually with my bro, and he does the same thing. Before I'd ever caught an Uber, he was the one who told me about getting them to confirm your name. Also checking the license plate before getting in. He's a male usually traveling alone, and even he doesn't take risks. We had a woman try to steal our Uber once. She wouldn't show us her phone to confirm it. We asked the driver who he was picking up, and when he said my bro's name, we got in the car. She was holding the door open and was saying, "No, it's supposed to be an Uber share. I need to get in." We would never share an Uber with a stranger. The driver was asking her to shut the door. She tried the whole, "I'm a female and it's after midnight. Are you going to make me stand out here alone?" We were in a busy area. She could already have had another Uber by now instead of fudge around. My bro said, "I have a female with me. We can't be standing around after midnight either." Then he looked at me and in a stern voice told me to close the door. I grabbed the door handle and yanked that door closed. She had to jump out of the way as she was keeping the door open with her body. She was small. Even though she was a small woman and there were 2 of us, she was acting dodgy as fudge. We take no chances. We aren't rude to people, but both of us getting home safe is more important than being polite. She was not stranded in the middle of butt fudge. We were outside a train station after a concert, and there was a busy pub across the street. There were people everywhere. And if you're not comfortable being out alone at midnight, don't go out. Story 19. Mine's a bit different than most of these since I headed into the danger. But it was a good thing. I was around 7 and my cousin was my very best friend. We lived in the same city and had sleepovers on the regular. I had never not wanted to stay at her place. But when my parents were standing at the door saying bye, I started bawling and saying I wanted to sleep at home tonight. They tried to convince me to stay and have fun, but I was insistent. Note I had a filled, medium-sized aquarium in my bedroom that I loved. Anyways, I went to bed like normal, but woke up around 3 a.m. I rolled over and the wall my aquarium was against was on fire, pretty much the entire wall. I ran across the hall to my parents' room, woke them, and they put it out before it spread further. Turns out a pebble has been sucked up into the filter and jammed it, causing it the overheat and started a fire at the wall socket. All my fish died, which I was really sad about, but my parents are convinced I saved our house and maybe their lives that night. The smoke alarm would not have gone off till most of my room and engulfed, and at that point, there would have been nothing they could do. Answer: I have a super similar story. We were renting a place super cheap because we were also fixing it up for the landlord. One day I flipped out and did not want to go to school. It wasn't my usual I don't want to go to school, like screaming, shaking and crying that I couldn't go to school. I was like 12, so everybody else left for the day. I was enjoying daytime TV when I smelled something weird. I go upstairs and someone had left a work light on, laying on a drop cloth. The drop cloth was smoking like crazy. I was that smart because I called my mom from the house phone asking her what to do. Within 5 minutes, there was a fire truck, ambulance, and a couple cop cars. They dragged it out and told me it was about 5 minutes away from flames. When my mom got there and saw it on our lawn, she started crying and saying that I saved the family. We all decided I was psychic, and I took that to the bank. Anytime I wanted to cut school, nobody would argue with me about it. I racked up 26 absences and 30 tardies that year. Story 20. Not sure this qualifies, but I'll tell it anyway. In 2008, I lived in a housing project for a few months. It was officially me and my friend on the lease, both around 21, but several different young kids as young as 15 lived with us at one time or another. They slept on mattresses on the floor. I locked my bedroom and kept it like a normal home, but the rest of it really just looked like a crack house or something. Mattresses on the floor, dirty dishes in the sink, 40s in the fridge. There were gouge marks on my front door that had been painted over. They looked like someone had tried to bash the door in. People in and out of the apartment constantly, frequently people that had lived in that project their entire life. When a neighbor in a place like that sees that you are having any kind of social gathering, or sometimes even if you aren't, often they'll more or less invite themselves in, and you really can't risk offending. One time, a guy I had never seen was suddenly in my living room with 10 or so others wed invited and spent over an hour just fiddling with the sound settings on a boombox sitting in the room. I was positive it was tagged for theft, although nobody ever stole it. The cops were around a lot. Security for the apartment complex practically lived in our place, and they'd call the local police for backup, who would clear people out and then just leave us be. Rarely or never was anyone arrested. It's possible someone was, and I just wasn't around that night. And I am absolutely positive it was because most of us were white. We 100 deserved to be arrested. Especially me, I was an adult in a crack house full of minors doing substances and adult beverage. My friend came over one time and commented, "What is this, child services?" because of how many teens had run away from home to crash at our place for one stretch of a few weeks or another. I kind of shrugged. I knew the whole situation wouldn't last, but I was in a live in the moment time of my life, and the project also happened to be across the street from where I was going to college. One night, I stepped out front for a smoke. So much smoking of everything happened inside the apartment that I don't know why I bothered. I'm standing there thinking when I hear a voice call me from my left. There's a staircase to an upstairs apartment stoop at the next building. An old woman is calling to me. I climb the stairs and say hello. She's probably 70, but black don't crack, so she could have easily been 90, and she asked me to sit down. My spider sense, which was pretty good at that time in terms of the dangers of the project, wasn't tingling, so I puffed on my camel filter and obliged. Bless this woman's heart. She looked at me with a stern expression and spoke to me like a scolding parent. I will never forget her words. "Do you understand that everyone in this place is looking at you right now? Your names are in everyone's mouth. Everyone in here is aware of you. You may as well have a spotlight on you, and this is not a place you want to have a spotlight on you. Something very, very bad is going to happen in that apartment of yours very soon. If things continue as they are, you need to leave this place as soon as you can." I told her I would, and I did. Within a few weeks, I'd moved out of there. I heard from a friend and then later read in the news that not long after I'd left, In that very project, in an apartment around the way, a fight had broken out over a missing bag of substances and guns had been drawn. Multiple people were eliminated in the crossfire, some of them innocent bystanders. It sent a chill up my spine that it could so easily have been my apartment. I'll never forget the time I spent in that place, and I'll never forget the tough love that strangers showed me. I never even learned her name. Story 21. BFE, Wyoming. Yes, it exists. And the wife is on a dinosaur dig. I've got my 2 youngest kids, 4, 6, and we go out hiking while she digs. Not far from the vehicles, we make it to the top of the tallest hill in the area. Stop to take some pics and notice my son and daughter's hair stars standing on end. One of my all-time greatest pics is of my daughter pointing and laughing at her brother's crazy hair, while hers is going nuts as well. As soon as I snap the pic, I remember a cartoon from Boys Life magazine from like 30 years prior about frizzy hair while on a mountain means a lightning strike is imminent. I put the phone away, grab them both, and run off the mountain. We get back to the vehicles just in time to see the storm roll in and take shelter from the lightning storm. Could have been 1,000 times worse. Answer: that was very sensible. Maybe this one? The photo was taken in 1975 and is of an 18-yo, his 12-yo brother, hair on end, with a stormy background. Their 15-yo sister took the photo. It turned out that Sean, 18 on a yo, was one of at least 3 people hit directly that day by the triple-pronged bolt, including one man who died and another who sued the U.S. government for not warning about lightning danger. Jensenius noted. The lawsuit was dismissed. Sean was knocked unconscious and suffered third-degree burns to his back and elbows. Story 22. Decades ago, I was in Indonesia on a business trip for my Australian cousin who owned a small factory manufacturing camping goods. While leaving the airport in my hired car, I looked around, and the hair on the back of my head began to rise. Little did I know that it was the middle of a revolution, and there was fighting in the streets. My airline deplaned the passengers and there was no information at the airport, so I had no idea what was happening. While in my car, I told the driver to immediately stop going to my address given by my company and go to the nearest 5-star hotel. Within 30 seconds, I saw burning tires in the middle of the street where people were being dragged from their cars. My driver did a battlefield U-turn at an ungodly speed. You never want to be in a Mercedes making a turn like that. To this day, nobody believes me when I say the G-forces nearly caused me to faint. Possibly it was my face slamming in the side window. Gave the driver a 50 tip. Slept in the bathtub of the hotel I checked into while tracer bullets were being fired and explosions being heard around the city. Story 23. Wanted to leave but wasn't able to at first. Moved to NYC and had traveled a lot but still very naive, sheltered. Went to the ferry and met this girl who was very nice but ever so slightly off, now no, probably substances. After a minute, where she confirmed I wasn't from NY and had no family there, we were boarding the ferry, and her friend, a good-looking and very well-dressed man, came over. She never said a word again. I just remember sitting with him taking the seat next to me and her across and feeling not right as we were talking with the hairs on my arm standing up. Then he started complimenting me, and my brain went off. I was very scrubby and tomboyish back then, LOL. But I was Wisconsin nice, and they weren't doing anything wrong bad. So we kept speaking even though I wanted to leave their presence, though a part of me also realized I couldn't fully leave them while on the ferry. The man kept schmoozing and asking me to come to a party with them later. I deferred hard but had never had a situation like this, so didn't know how to shut it down yet. Like an idiot, I gave him my phone number, so naive and stupid, because he and the girl hovered over me while repeatedly asking and then calling it right there. I did have the smarts to tell him I didn't really know where I lived as I had just moved. As we docked, I stayed near the ferry worker nearest me and then pretended to call a friend while near another as they tried to get me to go with them. That guy called me multiple times, very oily and complimentary, trying to get me to come out and call him back. The last time, he finally got mad and ordered me to call him back while calling me names. As I grew and learned and became a nurse, I realized just how south that could have gone and will teach my own daughter to recognize the signs and shut it down hard. Story 24. My dad, brother, and I were going through Banff National Park when we saw a van pulled over and they family was looking into the woods, so we stopped to see if they needed help. It turns out they were throwing rocks into the bushes because they thought they saw a bear and wanted it to come out so they could take a picture of it. We noped out of there at near record speed. Looking back, I'm pretty sure that it was Kevin's family. Story 25 was on Bourbon Street in New Orleans some years back. About 11:30, the vibe had changed. People responding angrily if someone bumped into them when before everyone was just like, no problem. Bouncers throwing people out into the street literally onto their faces. I said, let's go. I'm not liking this. 20 minutes after we left, the shooting started. 9 people shot, 2 of them eliminate. Trust your gut, people. Answer. Was in a pub in London in the mid-90s. At one end of the bar, left alone by every other patron, was a bunch of guys in Chelsea strips sinking pints like it was going out of fashion. The door opened, and in walked a bunch of guys in what I would later learn was Millwall tops. Everyone in there started making a dash for the door, and the pub staff started shoving stuff off the bar onto the floor and slamming the bar shutters down. I left with everyone else. Sometimes the signs don't have to be subtle. Story 26. At a house party in college, some guy pulled out a katana and said, "Want to see something cool?" That was my cue. Grabbed my drink, grabbed my friend, and said, "We're leaving before this turns into a Netflix true crime special." Story 27. I was sitting in the parking lot of my then-boyfriend's apartment complex with him smoking a joint at night. He had just gotten a used BMW that was in great condition. The neighboring apartment complex housed many known gang members he grew up with, but had to part ways with due to their lifestyle. One gang member in the other complex had the same BMW as my ex in black. My ex's car was not black, but it was dark-colored and looked black at night. I suddenly got a terrible feeling and said, "I think we should go," to which he dismissed my concern. I didn't let it go and said it a few more times until I practically yelled at him, saying, "Let's go, right, fudge, now I'm not playing games." And he reluctantly started to back out of the spot. 4 spots down, we noticed someone creeping in between other cars in the lot and had to pass him to exit the complex. The guy was holding a short-barreled AK-47 rifle. My ex called his old friends and asked them, WTF was going on, and we found out that dude we saw almost eliminate us because he thought we were the guy from the other complex. Apparently, the intended target had many close calls around that time as retaliation for his actions. My ex sold that car within a week. Story 28. Halloween night 1989. Ex-wife and I went to Hollywood for kicks, people watching, etc. It was insanely crowded. Street closed down, cops on horseback walking up and down the center. We were there maybe an hour and I saw a bottle fly out of the crowd and hit a cop. I grabbed the wife and said we gotta go. We parked off a side street not too far from where we were, made it to the car and split just before the riot happened. Story 29. This is back in 1999. My granddad and grandma owned a farm with a beautiful old house that dates back to the 1700s. Also located just across from the farmhouse was her pub restaurant. And on this New Year's Eve night, everyone was getting ready to celebrate the incoming millennium. So by about 7 p.m., the whole village is now in the pub and the drinks are flowing, but us kids are starting to get bored and asked to go play the PlayStation in the house. So my ma'am takes us down to the house and sets the PlayStation up to the TV and tells us if we need anything, just come up to the pub. Then off she goes back to the party, leaving me 14, my sister 10, and my cousin 14 to our own devices. We play games for hours and eventually we start to get bored of the PlayStation, so we decided to watch a film. This will be around 11 p.m. at this point. I will set the scene a bit here. This old farmhouse is huge and a bit creepy. It's so old that it had a servant's quarters. Over the years, the large double front door stopped getting used in favor of the easy single door for the servants' quarters that leads into the main house. You enter the front door into a long corridor. 3 doors on the left lead to rooms which servants would have used: washroom, pantry, and a storage room. At the end of a corridor, a door leads into what would have been the sleeping quarters, but is now my uncle's man cave. On the right, you enter into the large kitchen, which you can then access the rest of the house. So us kids are in the living room, which is directly adjacent to the man cave, and we decided to go raid my uncle's stash of VHS and find something to watch. So I walk through the kitchen into the hall and try to open the door to his room, but the door is jammed. This room is never locked, but maybe he's locked it to keep us out. I keep trying the door in case it's just a bit tight, and the door does open a little way. Not enough to see through, but enough that it isn't the lock stopping the door from opening. I try shoulder barge the door, but it's solid and feels like something is behind the door. At this point, I give up and I walk up to the pub to tell my ma'am I can't get into the man cave. So she comes back down to the house with me and I show her the door's open partially, but it won't move. She tries and she says, "Oh yeah, that is strange." She tries again a bit harder and nothing. So she heads back up to the pub to ask my uncle if he's put some sort of lock on the door. While she does that, I go into the living room and start swapping the PlayStation SCART cable for the VHS cable. The TV back then is enormous, and I am fully behind the TV in the corner, playing with cables when my ma'am comes back in the house. She walks in and tells us that there is no lock on the door. Then she goes back to the man cave door and starts really charging this door to get it to open. I heard the bang, bang, bang as she's charging into this door, and then suddenly I hear her shout, "Everybody out now!" Immediately, I knew something really bad was happening. I could sense the fear in her voice, so I scramble out from behind the TV and run as fast as I can through the kitchen and into the hallway. Soon as I got into the hall, my hair stood on end as I can feel a rush of cold winter air blowing through the man cave window and straight through the open hall door. Immediately, my eyes lock onto the open gun cabinet on the wall and a bookshelf on the floor that was stopping the door from opening. I turn in panic and run for the pub, but by the time I get to the pub, my ma'am had already alerted the pub to the break-in, and an endless stream of bodies ran out of the pub towards the house. Shortly after, we realized the full extent of what had happened. Someone had cut a circle in the glass like you'd see on a film, and they opened the window to get to the gun cabinet. They had stolen a vast array of shotguns and rifles and some ammo, but not all of it. Some of the guns were laid on the bed and against the wall. Ammo was spilled onto the floor that looked like it had been dropped in panic. The police believed the first time I tried to get into the room, I had actually disturbed the thieves, and that's what stopped them taking everything. Even to this day, when I go into that house and I see that door, it gives me the creeps, knowing that someone had guns on the other side of that door while I was trying to get in. TLDR, my family's farm got broken into while I was in the room next door. Answer, this doesn't fit exactly, but you reminded me of something that happened to me at my first job. We had a small employees-only back room with a door that locked, but we never locked it, unless we were changing or something. The room also had a door to outside that locked automatically when it closed, and we kept the keys to both doors in the cash register. Details are a bit muddy. This was 20 years ago. I was 17 and working alone, and suddenly the back room was locked. I didn't think much of it, grabbed the key and entered from outside, grabbed what I needed and carried on. Later, I went into my wallet and saw all my money was gone. I had $400 in cash for some reason, which was a lot of money for me. I must have had to pay for the sport I was a part of or something similar. I remember that it wasn't my money to spend. That's when I realized that whenever I unlocked the door to grab what I needed, the thief was still in the back room with me. I called the police, probably non-emergency, and told them I was reporting a robbery. The woman on the phone very rudely told me that's a theft, not a robbery, and they wouldn't do anything about it. My awesome boss owner very kindly replaced my lost money. The back room was tiny. I definitely would have seen the thief if I turned my head the right way, but I'm glad it worked out how it did. Story 30. Living in Vancouver going to college. A friend of mine suggested we go to this house party that another person in our class was hosting. We were both pretty new to the city and wanted to make friends, so we decided to go. We get to the party and the house is absolutely packed. Turns out this guy had like 7 roommates and they all invited their friends. We start drinking and having a good time, chatting and milling around the party. I lose track of time and realize I can't find my friend. Wandering around looking for her, as she was a bit of a party animal, I make it to the upstairs bedroom. The ensuite bathroom door is open and there's people in there snorting something. Inside the bedroom is my friend, fudge up on something. In the bed in a cuddle puddle, they called it, with 5 guys on either side of her. Some of them didn't have shirts on. There was empty bottles everywhere. Suddenly I was stone cold sober and decided we have to leave now. Grabbed my friend, grabbed her bag, and marched her out to the curb where we could get a taxi. I'll always be okay with being the party pooper because I'm pretty sure I saved my friend from gang RP that night. Story 31. Bar scene with some people getting aggressive. Saw one guy push another, and I grabbed my friends to get the hell out of there. Shootings are not uncommon, and the location we were at had zero space to avoid anything. Everyone pretty much ran from it. That night it ended up being fine, but one of the 2 groups ended up shooting the other and eliminate one of them the next night. Multiple injuries GSWs. Probably the worst shooting of this summer so far. We all got together again at a friend's house and talked about it. Initially, I was told I was being too much by dragging them out of the bar. I got my apologies that night. Answer, a couple friends and I were looking for another guy from our group. Turns out he had left way before us without saying anything. We were out front looking for him, and all of a sudden some dudes from the club start exchanging words on the side of the building away from the bouncers. My friend and I took one look at each other and started dragging our other tipsy friend away with us. I was certain at least one of them had a gun. 2 weeks later, there was a shooting in the same club. Never went back there. Story 32. This is a little different, but a buddy and I had finished a climb in Estes Park, Colorado. As we pull up over the top, a wall of storm cloud is coming at us fast. My buddy is carefully coiling the rope and re-racking the protection, as the sky is starting to explode with lightning around us. I suggest, with much emphasis and profanity, that perhaps we should take care of gear organization a bit later on. He did suddenly realize our situation, and we crammed it all in our packs and sprinted down as fast as we could. This guy was a really detail-focused climber, which is usually great, but he had to be snapped out of it sometimes. Story 33. My husband and I sold our condo and we're closing on a new house in a few weeks, so we rented the condo back until closing. We sold at the same time as another owner, and there were new renters. They were really clearly not good people, and it was already scary being around them. Their dog attacked our neighbor's dog and nearly eliminated her, so we sent our dogs to stay with my parents until we moved. One day it was over 100 degrees, and they left their dog on their deck in the sun the entire day in a crate with no water. It was a small crate, and she was pregnant, and the deck is literally in the sun from 11 a.m. until dark. With the people being gone that entire time, someone called animal control who sent fire trucks, cops, etc. I happened to be getting out of my car when they showed up, so they asked me to let them in and how to get to Unit X. As I walked up the stairs, not in the same area as my condo, so I didn't know this, I realized they had cameras set up outside their door, so I knew they would assume I had called. I was not home. Firemen ended up scaling the building, getting the dog down, find the owner, etc. I talked to the cop who had asked for help and told him I was concerned about the cameras and that they'd blame me for calling, and he basically said, "Why would you be concerned?" I even ended up going to the police station in tears a few hours later because I was so scared of what he'd do, but the cop just said I had nothing to worry about despite the criminal record of this guy. A few hours later, I hear someone outside my deck screaming. My husband and I go out and see the guy who lives there, waving a gun at me, screaming about what he would do to me. I was trying to be nice and de-escalate, and thank God my neighbor heard and called 911, who heard the whole thing. My husband is the chillest human ever and was absolutely panicked and trying to calm him down. Finally, he just walked off, but we decided that second, we could never be there again. We packed a quick bag, stayed with a friend overnight, I hired someone, and came back the next day long enough to pack the entire condo and get a storage unit, and never went back. That night at our friend's house was absolutely terrifying. We were so scared because he had done thousands in damage to both of our cars, and the police again just said there's no proof. The guy didn't even get questioned for pointing a gun at people. We heard later he was in his right mind and felt bad and wanted to apologize. Absolutely not. No thanks. Story 34. Whenever the birds get quiet, or if you're in the ocean and see all the small fish disappear, you fudge leave. Answer: I was hiking in New Hampshire and everything got quiet. Then I noticed that the bark of the trees seemed to be rippling. When I looked closer, I saw that the trees were covered in harvestman spiders that were running down to the ground by the thousands on every tree that I could see. When I looked at the ground, it was covered in a moving carpet of harvestmen running away down the mountain. I've never seen anything like it. I am not afraid of those spiders. I even handle them occasionally. They are just the daddy long legs of the forest. But this was terrifying. I told my family we needed to leave now because when animals behave like this, something is coming, and you'd be a fool not to take warning. We rushed back to the trailhead, got in the car, and drove away from the mountain. Shortly after we left, it was hit with a massive lightning storm. There had been nothing forecast, and the sky was clear when we left. Story 35. Not me, but my friend. She was about to get on a tram in our city, and she said she suddenly felt Allah, she's, you guessed it, Muslim, telling her to skip that one and get on the next one. She texted me this and said she'd be late to class. I wasn't even planning on going because I wasn't feeling well. 2 hours later, I got a call from my dad. He was fine, everyone was safe, but he told me there had been a terror attack and someone had eliminated 4 people on a tram. It was the one my friend skipped. She was on the tram right behind it and had to flee. Edit Netherlands, 18th of March, 2019. Story 36. Back when I was a part-time bank teller, I got a second job to supplement my income. One of my girlfriends from the first job was having a get-together in the bar district for her birthday and invited me. I was going to go, but I talked myself out of it because it was tax-free weekend, so my second job was going to be bonkers. Never in my life before that had I ever chose to not go out, or whatever the proper grammar is, I slept like shoot last night, LOL. But for whatever reason, that night I texted her around 11:30 p to say I wasn't going to make it, but to have fun and have a purple gecko shot for me. I woke up at like 4:30 the next morning and my phone had hundreds of notifications. That night around 1 a.m., some dude with a figurative axe to grind eliminates 7 people in roughly 30 seconds in the bar my friends were in. My friends were all fine ultimately, and I had some weird survivor's guilt that I had to work through. I still have no idea why I passed other than a weird feeling I was no stranger to staying out all night. Running home to change and wash my face and then immediately going to work. It wasn't work that kept me home that night. Everyone ribs me because I talk about that feeling in my belly button and how I refuse to ignore it. But man, oh man, I shiver to think of the consequences. Answer: similar situation, but it was my sister. She wanted to take her kids, my nephews, to a trunk or treat in the suburbs. She lives in the city and a lot of her co-workers live in a nice suburb, and invited her to join them. Her husband was working, so she asked me to come to help wrangle the oldest. She got a weird feeling and asked if we could take the kids to a different event. She didn't want to disappoint the oldest, but just couldn't shake her gut, feeling that something was wrong. An off-duty officer with an axe to grind showed up and opened fire at the event. Fortunately, he didn't hurt anyone, but so glad we weren't there. Story 37. I was only 20 when one of my blood relatives woke the whole darn house up at 3 o'clock in the morning, claiming that they heard someone cut the gas line. Full psychotic break. EMS showed up just before I drove off, so I didn't feel bad about leaving. I shoved whatever I could into the messenger bag I used for school stuff and got the hell out. That was the final straw, man. I was not about to sit around and watch the crazy go down in real time. My grandma also lived in the house, and if I'd had the resources and she were ambulatory, I would have taken her with me. I felt so guilty about leaving her there, but she gave me a big hug and a 20 bill and went, "You need to look out for yourself first." Story 38. Not me, but a guy my mom worked with decades ago. He and his family were on vacation at the beach. The water started rolling way out, and his wife suddenly got up and said that she wanted to leave. He and their 2 teenagers objected because it looked cool. She did not have a concrete reason for wanting to leave. She just had a bad feeling about how the ocean looked. The guy said his wife had never done anything like that before, and he figured she didn't feel well, and then the ocean looking so strange just pushed her over the edge with acute homesickness or something. But his wife's behavior was weird enough to him that they grabbed their stuff and headed back toward the hotel so she could rest. And that's how they survived the tsunami in Thailand back in 2004. They barely made it. The wife apparently had no idea why she wanted to leave. Just that something was giving her a bad vibe like she had never felt in her life. Personally, I assume that at some point in her life, she had learned and mostly forgotten the fact that a tsunami starts with the water receding very far, and that when she saw it, she couldn't quite remember learning that fact, but it was just floating around in her subconscious. I recall there were stories of a few people surviving because they had learned about that. Story 39. One time when I was probably 16, I was at a house party, kind of a trap house, and buddy who owned the house took a phone call, then went into the back room and came back with a shotgun and said, "Stay away from the window shoot going down tonight." We ended up getting out of there ASAP, but it was some kind of gang war going on, and the house had been targeted. Story 40. It was 2010. I'd recently moved home and needed a job. I was temporarily staying with my grandma and uncle. One morning, they gave me a lift into town for a job interview. They went for a wander around the shops whilst I looked for the shop I had the interview at. It was a nice morning, and I'm daydreaming a little while I walk. I get there and the door's locked, and so I knock. A woman comes to the door and says, "There's a madman on the loose shooting people." She looked terrified, and my mind flashed to my grandma and uncle wandering about. I ran off to find them and realized all the shops were empty, and I just hadn't noticed earlier. In the end, it turned out we got there about half an hour after he'd left. In that moment that I realized what was going on, my eyes literally bulged. This was in the UK. Shootings like this are extremely rare. Rep the victims of Derek Bird. Story 41. My son had leukemia and was in chemotherapy. He was just off for a couple days. I kept telling his dad I think we should take him into hospital. Son had an appointment coming up anyway, and the hospital is a long drive away, so Dad convinced me to wait. Third day, I just knew we had to go. I cannot describe the way I felt. I just knew. I made a scene, started an argument, screamed till we went. The knowing we had to go immediately was so strong, it was like a fact. Son had a raging ear infection, and his meds were causing an issue on his kidneys. He went straight to the oncology ward for a week, straight onto strong IVs antibiotics. Doctor later told me my son was so sick his blood was almost nothing but water. He was in nappies again. One overflowed as he slept and went all over the bed sheets. I had never seen pinkweed before or since, never want to again. The nurses stopped me stripping his sheets off the bed and got me to shower my son immediately, wash my hands too. The smell coming off my son made me gag, and I was crying quietly as I washed him, so he didn't know. I know now that my son had been actively dying, and that smell was passing being purged out of him. He recovered in time to be released back home on Christmas Day. I was so stressed out I spoke to my own doctor to unpack it all. He was so kind and told me that I saved my son's life by following my maternal instinct. My son is now remission and living his best life. I'm always on edge when he's sick though. Never ever ignore your parental gut instinct. Story 42. I got invited to a party by an acquaintance I wanted to like more than I actually did. I got picked up by the acquaintance and we arrived at the party, and as soon as we made it into the living room, I discovered this party was going to be just the two white boy thug types with tattoos and shaved heads drinking beer on a couch, with meth, plant substance, and more beer on the coffee table. The female acquaintance who brought me, a 9-year-old boy in dirty clothes, and me, clearly brought because the acquaintance wasn't sure about coming alone, and had basically enlisted me as a bodyguard without telling me that's what was happening. I sat in the chair for a moment, not sure if it would be wise or safe to just turn around and leave immediately, or if I should be polite and stay for a few minutes. For about 5 minutes, I just grin and nod along without adding anything to the conversation. When the boy comes up to me and says to that, he wants his parents to come home because his uncle is always like this. I went to the kitchen and looked into the backyard. The dumb luck of seeing 2 cop cars driving towards the street this house was on, in between the other row of houses. I went out the back door, through the yard, jumped the fence, and walked through yards and in between houses at an almost run. I walked all the way home, which was about a 30-minute walk. 2 days later, I found out everyone in the house had been arrested and the kid went to CPS. I never talked to that girl again. Just the absolute stupidest thing I ever went through, and to this day, nearly 20 years later, I do not get into anyone else's car. I drive myself so I can leave anytime I want to. Story 43. Leaving a friend's apartment late at night, like 3 a.m., it's a long corridor to get outside of the complex and get to my car across the street. I'm a third of the way through the corridor and I feel someone behind me. I look corner of my eye style, and at the beginning of the corridor, there's a guy in a hoodie. I start walking faster. They start walking faster, halfway down the corridor. I stop and look directly at them. They pause for a sec, then start running. I start running. I bust out of the gate, get in my car, and they are right at my door. Just then, a car turns the corner, headlights shining at us. He looks at the headlights, and I floor it out of there. Story 44. A friend and I were first years at university, and one night we went to an off-campus house party. It started like every other party we'd ever been to there. Lots of drinking, flirting, shenanigans, and people getting too close to the fire pit out back, etc., etc. We knew this place. We knew everyone who lived there, and almost everyone at this party. I started getting a weird feeling. Then I walked around a corner and saw a dude standing in the kitchen just casually naked. I turned around, gave my friend a look, and walked out the door at the opposite end of the house with her in tow. I found out later that the party turned into an orgy right after we left and everyone involved got STDs. No judgment, I just didn't want to be there for that, and I'm glad we left. Story 45. Was at a plaid pantry for a beer run. I was tipsy, my sober brother drove me. I walked in and saw 2 sketchy bad vibe gentlemen that looked like they were up to no good. Even in my drunken state, I quickly gathered my things and walked out of the store after paying. I told my brother who was waiting in the parking lot the whole time to get going. Go, go, go. 5 minutes later, we hear sirens and cops rushing toward that store. The store was robbed at gunpoint. Story 46. I was once hanging out with an old coworker friend, and we ran into another former colleague, a woman we both knew. The day was relaxed and fun, though I sensed there might be something going on between them. No big deal. They were both single and grown. We ended up going to his place later. I had known him for years and never felt unsafe around him, even though he had been to jail once for assaulting a cop. We smoked and had a few drinks. Everything was chill. Then I came back from the bathroom and saw her looking at me with this silent, panicked expression. I didn't know what happened while I was gone, but the whole vibe had shifted. He was totally out of it and started talking weirdly about passing. I can't explain it, but it felt wrong way. That was my "we need to leave now" moment. She slowly slipped past him, we exchanged one quick look, and then we ran out of the apartment. Never went back. Story 47. Pulled over at a gas station a bit south of Gary. I think it was in Hobart Inn. Thought it was far enough south, brought my 1-year-old in to change in the bathroom. No changing table as I come out to get him into the car seat. I hear, "Bro, you're gonna pull a fin gun on me?" I threw the baby in my wife's arms and ripped off a mile down the road before changing him in the back seat and putting him back in his car seat properly. Story 48. Fire in the surrounding hills and neighborhood grew to 1,500 acres and evacuation was hectic. You're trying to load chute quickly and it's frantic. A wall of smoke rolls in and all normal functions just shut off. You can't see chute, only smell. In that terrifying moment, I told my mom, "That's it, we're out of here." Story 49. This year, I went outside for a walk. I started to become lightheaded, sick to my stomach all of a sudden, breath hitching, and even got dizzy and fell to my knees. Something deep in my gut and in my head kept telling me, "Go inside," like over and over and over again, like something was screaming at me. I went inside. Right as I got into my room, I found that I not only forgot to blow out one of my candles, but it fell, lit something on fire, and exploded one of my favorite glass dishes. I put it out with a blanket in quick haste, and overall things were fine, aside from my blanket being burned and my broken dish, but fudge man, certainly more careful after that if I wasn't already. Edit. And yes, I was totally fine after I put the fire out. I was not dizzy, gut feelings gone, no more sickness, etc. Went outside to walk again. Story 50. When I was a teenager, my friend and I would sneak out at night and bike to the lake that was a few miles in between our houses, mainly to smoke and play chess. We did this extremely often, like almost every single night. It was our midnight ritual. We would smoke and play a few games of chess. We were never afraid of the dark and frequently would just play by moonlight. We both grew up in the woods, so we were extremely comfortable in the woods at any time of day. This was our safe spot. One night, we are sitting by the lake in the dark, in the middle of a game, no words spoken, when we suddenly both stand up out of nowhere and begin sprinting faster than I knew was physically possible. We just ran and ran, easily 2 miles as fast as we physically could. No words spoken, just pure fear. We left our stuff and our bikes behind. When we had made it back to a neighborhood, we both were like, "What the fudge was that?" Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you'd like to see more content like this, you might be interested to know that I've created another channel with a similar theme, especially for those of you who enjoy what I do. I'll leave a link in the description, and I hope to see you there. Take care.